I'll never forget the expression on Brenda Carmichael's face the day she marched into that courtroom. Chin high, hair teased to perfection, and a designer bag swinging like a trophy at her side. She gripped her lawsuit papers as though they were a golden ticket, already picturing the smug speech she'd deliver at the next HOA meeting. In her mind, this was the day. She'd finally put me in my place. The woman who'd made my life a living nightmare for months was certain this was her big moment. What she didn't know was that I had a little surprise of my own, sitting neatly inside my own briefcase. Documents that would wipe that victorious grin right off her face. Evidence so ironic, so completely unbelievable, that even I had trouble accepting it when I first found it. Brenda Carmichael, self-proclaimed Queen of Silver Creek Meadows, president of the HOA and my personal tormentor, had unknowingly built part of her house on my land. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's rewind to where it all began, 6 months earlier, when I made the single biggest mistake of my life, moving into her kingdom. The realtor had described it as a rare opportunity in the historic Silver Creek Meadows subdivision. The corner lot on Elmwood Drive and 2nd Avenue had been sitting unsold for almost a year. I should have taken that as a warning sign. The price was fair, the commute to work was ideal, and the 1960s ranch-style house needed work. Sure, but it had good bones. What could possibly go wrong? I got my answer the very next morning, while I was still unpacking boxes in my living room. I heard a sharp, rapid knock at the door. I opened it to find a woman in her early 50s standing on my porch, like a soldier on inspection duty. Pressed khakis, a crisp white button-down embroidered with the HOA logo, clipboard clutched in hand like a weapon. "I'm Brenda Carmichael, president of the Silver Creek Meadows Homeowners Association," she announced without so much as a hello. "We need to talk about several violations I've already noticed." I hadn't even finished unpacking, and apparently I was already a problem. She listed them off with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 10 times. My moving truck had been parked on the street longer than the permitted 2 hours. My lawn was a 1/4 inch above regulation height. And the mailbox, the one that came with the house, was not an approved model. She handed me a neat little stack of violation notices totaling $300 in fines, then flashed a smile so tight it could have cracked glass. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said before striding away. That's when I noticed her house sat directly behind mine. From that day on, Brenda made it her personal mission to make my life miserable. She'll find me for the color of my garden hose. She measured the distance between my trash cans with a tape measure like a detective at a crime scene. When I installed new blinds in my living room, she knocked on my door the next morning to inform me that off-white was not HOA approved. Only pure white was allowed. The breaking point came when I received a certified letter demanding 6 months of back HOA dues plus late fees. A total of $2,400. According to her, the previous owner had stopped paying. And now that I was the new owner, the debt was mine. When I tried to explain I'd checked my closing documents, she cut me off, arms folded like a judge passing sentence. "There's nothing to review," she said coldly. "Every homeowner in Silver Creek Meadows pays HOA dues. It's not optional. If you don't comply, I'll place a lien on your property." That night, I cleared my dining room table and spread out every document from closing. The deed, the survey, the title report. Everything I'd barely skimmed at the time. That's when I spotted something odd. Attached to the deed was a land lease agreement dated July 15, 1973. It stated that my property included not just the corner lot I'd purchased, but also a lease strip of land that extended beyond the surveyed property line. The lease had been paid in full for 99 years. Curious, I dove into the county's online records. What I found nearly knocked the wind out of me. That lease strip of land wasn't just some random piece of dirt. It included a significant portion of Brenda's backyard. The next morning, I went to the county recorder's office. Arthur, an older clerk with decades of experience, helped me piece it all together. I remember this mess, he said, squinting at the documents. Back in the 70s, the developer used these long-term land leases to finance Silver Creek Meadows went bankrupt. Parcels got sold off piece by piece. Nobody ever cleaned up the records, and according to those records, when Brenda's house was built in 1991, it was constructed partially on land covered by my lease. 20 feet of her lot, including part of her house, was technically on my leased property. I hired a real estate attorney, Robert Mitchell, who spent 2 weeks combing through everything. When he finally called me into his office, his words were both surreal and satisfying. "The lease is valid," Robert said, tapping the papers. "Legally. She's been trespassing for more than 30 years. You could demand rent or technically force her to remove the encroaching structure." I had no intention of tearing down someone's house, but I sure as hell wasn't going to keep letting Brenda bully me. When she sent another threatening letter demanding $3,000 in HOA dues and penalties, I decided it was time to hit back. Robert drafted a letter explaining that my property was exempt from HOA membership due to the lease agreement. We also very casually mentioned a boundary issue that would require resolution. Brenda's response was almost instant. She stormed up my porch the next day, face red, clutching the letter like it had personally insulted her. "How dare you try to weasel out of your obligations with some made-up technicality?" she shouted. "I don't care what some lazy lawyer says." And just like that, the battle lines were drawn. "You live in Silver Creek Meadows. You pay dues like everyone else," Brenda snapped, her voice sharp as broken glass. I stayed calm, which only made her angrier. "Brenda," I said, evenly, "I suggest you have your attorney review the documents we referenced. This isn't a loophole or some made-up trick. It's a legal reality. We'll see about that," she spat, her face flushed. "I'm filing a lawsuit first thing Monday morning. You'll pay those dues, plus every legal fee it cost me to teach you a lesson." And true to her word, the following week, I was served with a lawsuit. Brenda was suing me for unpaid HOA dues, late fees, legal costs, and, believe it or not, intentional infliction of emotional distress on the HOA board. She demanded over $10,000. Robert and I sat down to prepare our response. We agreed not to show all of our cards at once. Our official reply simply restated that my property was exempt from HOA membership and asked for dismissal of all claims. But along with that, we filed a counterclaim, trespassing and unjust enrichment for the unauthorized use of my leased land. The moment Brenda's lawyer, a young and eager attorney named Julian Hayes, received our counterclaim with the attached property documents, the tone shifted. 2 days later, Robert got a call. He put it on speaker. I don't think my client fully understood the situation. Julian said carefully, "Perhaps we could resolve this without further litigation." But Brenda was Brenda. She refused to back. Down at the settlement conference, she sat across from me with her arms folded and an icy glare fixed on my face, as if sheer willpower could make the problem disappear. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "I've lived in that house for 20 years. You can't just waltz in here with some ancient piece of paper and claim I'm on your land." Robert calmly spread out the evidence on the table. The original deed, the lease agreement, survey maps, and county records. Julian's face drained of color as he flipped through each page. "Mrs. Carmichael," he said quietly, "these documents appear to be legitimate. Your house is partially built on land leased to Mr. Vance." "Then the documents are wrong," Brenda barked, slamming her hand on the table. "This is fraud." The mediator, a retired judge named Evelyn Harper, spent nearly an hour reviewing everything. Finally, she peered at Brenda over her glasses. "Mrs. Carmichael," she said firmly, "I've seen many property disputes. These documents are authentic, properly recorded, and legally binding. You should consider settling." But Brenda wasn't interested in reason. She stormed out, declaring she'd see me in court. Julian followed, clearly trying to talk her down. 3 months later, the showdown finally came. Brenda swept into the courtroom like a queen entering her throne room. her best suit pressed to perfection, her HOA president pin glinting in the fluorescent lights. She took her seat at the plaintiff's table, shuffling her papers with a tight jaw and shooting me dagger-like looks. Judge William Harrison, a no-nonsense man in his 60s, read through the case file with growing interest. Brenda's attorney went first, arguing that I was just a delinquent homeowner trying to avoid his responsibilities through technicalities. Then Robert stood, calm and steady, and began to lay out our case. He showed how my property predated the HOA entirely, how the lease agreement explicitly exempted it from any HOA obligations. And then, finally, he dropped the bomb. Brenda's house was sitting partially on my leased land. The judge leaned forward, examining the survey maps and comparing them to satellite images on his laptop. The room was silent except for the shuffle of papers. "Let me make sure I understand this," Judge Harrison said slowly. "Mrs. Carmichael's house, the one from which she conducts HOA business, is partially built on land leased to Mr. Vance." "That's correct, Your Honor," Robert replied. The judge turned to Brenda. "Mrs. Carmichael, were you aware of this when you purchased your home?" Brenda's complexion shifted from red to bone white. "No, Your Honor. This is the first I'm hearing of it. And yet you've been collecting HOA dues and issuing fines to neighboring properties for 30 years. The judge said. "The HOA was established legally," Brenda protested. "We have proper documentation." "Documentation," the judge replied evenly. "That does not supersede prior property rights." For 10 long minutes, Judge Harrison reviewed every detail. Then he set the file down and gave his ruling. "I find in favor of the defendant, Mr. Vance. His property is clearly exempt from HOA membership based on pre-existing agreements. The plaintiff's claims are dismissed with prejudice, but he wasn't finished." Furthermore, the judge continued, regarding the counterclaim. "I find that Mrs. Carmichael has indeed been unjustly enriched by the unauthorized use of the defendant's leased land. While I won't order the removal of the structure due to the time elapsed, I am ordering that Mrs. Carmichael pay fair market rent for this land." He calculated the amount based on current land values and square footage. "Mrs. Carmichael, you are ordered to pay Mr. Vance $18,000 in back rent for the past 3 years, plus $400 per month going forward." With annual adjustments for inflation, Brenda shot up from her chair so fast it clattered backward. "This is outrageous," she shouted. "I'm not paying rent for my own property." "It's not your property, Mrs. Carmichael," the judge said sharply. "And I'd suggest you watch your tone in my courtroom. You're fortunate Mr. Vance isn't seeking to have your house torn down." Then he added one more thing. "It has also come to my attention during this proceeding that you've been harassing Mr. Vance with frivolous fines and violations. That stops immediately. Any further harassment will be considered a violation of this court's order and handled." Accordingly, Brenda's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Her lawyer was already packing up with the weary resignation of a man who'd lost the battle before it began. As I left the courtroom, I heard her voice echoing down the hallway. "Emergency board meeting tonight." No, it can't wait until Tuesday. 2 weeks later, 2 letters arrived in the mail. The first contained a check for $18,000 and a signed rental agreement for the land. The second came from the Silver Creek Meadows HOA board, announcing that Brenda Carmichael had resigned as president, effective immediately. Neighbors told me the board had voted her out after learning about the lawsuit and the humiliation she'd brought on the HOA. Her iron-fisted rule was over. The final twist came 6 months later when a moving truck pulled into her driveway. She couldn't stand living next to me, paying me rent each month, being reminded daily of her defeat. She sold the house at a steep loss, forced to disclose the land lease to every potential buyer. The new owners, the Harrisons, are a young couple who pay their lease fee promptly and are genuinely good neighbors. They even invited me to their housewarming party. As for Brenda, she moved to a new neighborhood across town, one without an HOA, every January when that rent check arrives. I can't help but remember the day Brenda Carmichael learned the hard way. Sometimes the person you try to push around just might own the ground beneath your feet.